Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Tina. I'll assume that you can all hear me properly. Today we have Filip Milačić with us. Filip Milačić is a political scientist. He holds PhD from Humboldt University in Berlin. He's currently a senior researcher at Friedrich Herbert Stiftung Democracy of the Future, and also he's a visiting professor at the CEU in Vienna and research affiliate of CEU's Democracy Institute in Budapest. Uh, Also, he's a former fellow of RECAS, so he's coming back home in certain ways. And his work is mostly dedicated to the relationship between nationalism, statehood, nationhood, and democracy. He has three books published on these topics. He mostly focuses on Eastern Europe and Western Balkans. The conversation we're going to have today is a talk is basically titled "Abandoning Democracy for the Nation," which is the title of his newest book, which is forthcoming in Cambridge University Press in May of 26. So we're going to treat this as a sneak peek or a preview of the arguments he made in his book that a wider audience will have a pleasure of reading in a few months. Before we start, I would just like to say that we did not envision this, or I did not envision this as a presentation or but rather a conversation or talk or interview in which Philip will have the opportunity to lay down his arguments, to explain his research, and also to maybe answer some questions and maybe hear some pushback on his arguments. Uh, about the book and the topic of today's talk, I'm not gonna speak extensively now, but in short, the book deals with the question why voters support politicians that are willing to subvert democracy. So basically, why voters allow for democracies to erode. And the focus of the book is actually on five cases, which is Serbia, Hungary, Poland, Israel, and Turkey. All very famous cases of democratic backsliding, at least in some time periods. Basically, this is the kind of uh, the departing point for today's talk. So I know it's a bit weird because we're talking about the arguments in a book that none of us had a chance of reading yet. But for that reason, I'll just start with a broad kind of question, and to hit it off, I'll just begin with kind of question that your book, Philip, starts with a paradox, which is empirically confirmed, and that paradox basically can be summarized in a fact that sorry, first, maybe I should, or I say that basically sorry. I would like to thank Philip first that he's taking time to spend today with us and to lose at least some of the arguments and to state what his research is basically dealing with. The paradox I was referring earlier was basically that people, on the one hand, tend to support democracy formally, but also are willing to compromise or willing to basically allow politicians to subvert democracy. So basically, they hold both democratic and authoritarian attitudes in the same time. One of the reasons why this might be happening or why they fall prey to these authoritarian politicians basically is the fact that, as you claim, is that elites are basically using a nation and nationalities as a cover, as a basically justification for why should allow them to take more power and to basically subvert democratic institutions. So my first question would be, why are these narratives so potent cover, such important part of the authoritarian playbook, and why political entrepreneurs engage in the identity game to begin with?
Um, First of all, thank you very much for the invitation, Nemanja, also Altina. I'm very happy to be here with you, particularly because I'm also a former fellow from the 2018 generation. And as Nemanja mentioned, this is the forthcoming book, and I just started promoting it, and I'm happy that this is the first event. There will be many this year, but I'm very happy because of my CAS background that this is the first event. So democratic backsliding is, I would say, the sexiest word right now in political sciences. So why? But we still don't know. We know a lot, but we still don't have full picture there. Why this happens? Especially what you ask, Nemanja, is that if we look at the surveys, even in the countries that were marked by autocratization in the last few years or the last decade, you will see that people still, the majority, the great majority, still value and cherish democracy as a form of the government. So why do they keep re-electing the politicians who subvert the very same democracy? Firstly, I would say that we had a kind of a romantic vision of electorate. So basically, we thought that people will always defend democracy. So they will always choose democracy or when the democracy is under attack, and that some other interests are not as important as democratic norms and principles. I think was a mistake because we see that for many individuals, many voters, some other interests are more important than democracy. So they are willing to engage in these trade-offs. However, you have this also argument saying that maybe they don't know something is undemocratic. So maybe they are choosing these leaders because they are convinced that these leaders are actually perfectly democratic, that they are behaving in a very democratic way. So I can tell you from my book and then from the surveys that I've done, this is not the case. So in these the voters of these parties that I analyzed, for example, voters of Fidesz or PiS in Poland or SNS in Serbia, the great majority knows what is democracy and what it's not. So we asked them, we tested their democratic competence, and we see this. So they're obviously choosing something else over democracy. And why is this the case? So I think again we need to go back to the human nature. So I think we have a wrong conception of human nature because we think that humans are only maximizing their economic benefits. So that's the key driver of an individual is to maximize his or her economic benefits. And I think this is a mistake because I think there are also some other interests that are equally important or even more important than economic interests. One of them is group belonging, because we know from social psychology that the group belonging is a fundamental need for many individuals. Why? This strengthens their self-esteem. It helps against social alienation. It helps them understand the world because of the categorization that groups enable. And the nation is one of the most important groups out there. So I think then this tells us why, initially at least, why this kind of a narrative that involves the nation is important for many citizens, many voters, many individuals.
Okay. So I mean, you went back to basically the human nature and the need for belonging, yeah. But if I need to, like a pushback, I'm not sure if it's a pushback or just an additional question, but nationalism is not the only. You said nation is one of the groups and not the only group in which people tend to define themselves. So coming from a voting behavior background in comparative politics, basically we dealt with these issues mostly through the literature of populism, and the populism was perceived, right-wing populism, especially last 2 decades, as a main problem of liberal democracy. Basically, that this idea, obsession with the ethno-nationalist narratives of question who belongs to this nation, who has a right to be part of this society. That was the most corrosive part of this ideology. So. Obviously nationalism has a competition in populism in terms of answering this question. So what would be your answer? What is difference? What is specific to nationalism compared to, for instance, right-wing populism, from the perspective of democratic backsliding or democratic performance overall? So what is new in this argument?
So I personally think that nationalism has been treated unfairly in this literature on democratic backsliding, that it was kind of swallowed by populism. And I'm not saying that they are not interconnected. They are often interconnected, but we should separate them. So, and then I offer two criteria how to differentiate between nationalism and populism. First thing is it's about in nationalism. The essence of nationalism is who belongs to the nation. So, for populism, for right-wing populism, this is also the case because don't forget the populism is based on pure people and corrupt elites, and these elites are also corrupt because they are betraying their ethnically defined nation, which is the version of the right-wing populism. But in populism can be also based on economic issues, on socio-economic interests, not only on national identity interests. And but nationalism is always about who belongs to the nation. So I think that right-wing populism and nationalism are very much related. But again, we should distinguish them because who belongs to the nation is inherent to the nationalism, whereas not to populism, because again, populism is also based on socio-economic interests and issues. The second reason why I differentiate between two is who is the outsider, because both populism and nationalism are based on the out group. So, but for populism, the out groups are the elites. For nationalism, the out groups can be elites. We have the cases there. But the outgroups can be also of different origins. For example, there can be sexual minorities, there can be immigrants, there can be ethnic and religious minorities in the society. There can be also external actors. For example, the West. The West is often in many countries the outgroup. So I think if we need to. I'm kind of arguing for conceptual clarity here, so that we don't define everything as populism. But if we have this clear narrative about who belongs to the nation and the outgroup is defined from the perspective of not belonging to the nation, I think this is nationalism. This is not populism.
So if I understood correctly, so you would basically claim that populism would be, the nationalism would be a broader term, a broader concept that
Yes.
so it can redefine outgroup in many different ways and criteria, yeah? Which is probably a reason why it's probably more effective or more useful to political entrepreneurs because they can cast much wider net compared to I guess using just populism because it narrows your strategic to ethno belongings. Yeah. So okay, so that would be maybe explanation of like why elites would engage in this game. But I think this, I mean, at least to me, a bit less interesting puzzle. Why would they use it? Because it's obviously politically opportune. But the more important, I think, a novelty in your book would be, okay, so what is about national narrative that is so effective among people? Why regular citizens who, as you said, understand what democracy is, they're competent in understanding democratic institutions, why they decide to make a trade-off between risking democracy for the nation? What is, I mean, beyond just sense of belonging, but like, what is the mechanism through which this belonging plays into political arena?
So first of all, I just want to say one thing is that in my book I talk about plausible mechanism. I'm not talking about causal mechanism because I admit that I don't have enough data to talk about causality. But what my aim was to offer something new, to offer a new perspective, and to plausibly establish the notion that this might be the case, and to encourage future research because I think we are quite often surprised why this works and why some guys keep getting reelected, because I think we still don't have proper theory to explain these processes. So my goal was to offer something new and to offer a plausible argument, and hopefully somebody will continue with this. So what's new with respect to my argument? I think what you said is political elites are always misusing these issues, and a lot has been written about political entrepreneurs, how they use this nation-related issues, for electoral mobilization, but also for democratic backsliding. But does this mean that it can work anywhere? So, for example, that in any country, just one politician will go there and say, yeah, our nation, I'm protecting our nation, I'm saving our nation, and this works. No, I think this would be too simplified, and because there is something more behind it. So, and I think what I discovered also by analyzing these cases and by doing a lot of interviews with political actors and people from civil society is that in these political entrepreneurs, they developed in each of these cases, they developed a threat narrative. So they picked an issue and developed around it a threat narrative, meaning that they identify the outgroup and that they said that this outgroup poses a threat to the nation. And I think this was key for their success. So in identifying a threat to the nation and creating this narrative according to which this group, this object poses a threat to the nation. And when this resonated, I think this is the key issue why they were successful later, not only for electoral mobilization, but also for attacking democracy. Then the question is, what are the objects for developing a successful threat narrative? It depends on the context. So because the objects were different, I can tell you in Poland and in Hungary there were immigrants because 2015, because of the immigration crisis. In Serbia, it's also context related. It was the West because of the historical reasons, and we can talk about it more. In Turkey, Erdogan also changed the narrative because, again, doesn't mean that if narrative resonates now, doesn't mean that it will resonate always. So you need to shift the object, you need to change the object. So in the beginning in Turkey, there are elites, secular elites, but then later we had Kurdish population and later also the West. So the first issue is that you need to develop a narrative that resonates. And in these cases, you had narratives that didn't resonate. For example, Orban tried firstly with homeless people, and then also he tried with Kosovo Albanians in 2013, 2014. It didn't resonate. He also tried with Roma people. Only with immigrants it did resonate. So again, and what I have found out from these interviews is that they are very diligent there. So they are doing focus groups, they are doing surveys to identify the object that could serve as a threat that could be potent for a threat narrative. And then again, the question is, why did it resonate? So, and then I also investigated the factors that enhance the possibility of this kind of a narrative resonates. And then we have different historical factors here, because in these 5 cases are all countries that either suffered territorial losses in their history, or they were occupied, or they lost their sovereignty. And also you have this victimization narrative that is strong. Some of these cases, they still don't have clear borders, or they have disputed national identity, or they have competing national narratives. So these are all factors that enhance the possibility of this kind of narrative resonating within the population. So meaning that these are the factors that promote ethnic nationalism in a society. However, I'm arguing against path dependency. So I'm not saying that you need to have these historical and structural factors are responsible for this kind of narrative resonating, because you have countries that I haven't investigated, maybe I should have, where you have this historically completely different situation, and you have also the civic nationalism prevailing during the formation of the state, not ethnic nationalism, for example, the United States of America or India or even Brazil. But then this kind of a narrative also about the endangered nation also resonated in them. So I think that what I'm trying to say is that political agency matters a lot here. And I think that this is also the case for the actions of the opposition, and we can talk later about it. But I think that, of course, there are some reasons that make the resonance of this narrative more likely. But again, I think also it's political agency plays a very important role. And then again, and I end with this, when you ask me about why people accepted this, is I go back to social psychology, to political psychology, because if you have this threat narrative and if it resonates, if people are convinced that their nation is under threat, then they are accepting something that they usually wouldn't accept. You have a lot of mechanisms they are working, like cognitive bias, motivated reasoning, and so on and so on. But in essence, they are either ignoring these attacks on democracy, or they are, what I say, more likely, they are basically accepting them because these attacks are done in the name of the nation. So when they are subverting democracy, they are saying we are doing this to protect the endangered nation, and people are accepting this if they are convinced that their nation is under threat. This is why this threat narrative is so important. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. So in 2023, the Polish PiS, they tried with anti-German narrative. It didn't resonate. Also now we can talk about Hungary. We see that Orban has a lot of problems because his current threat narrative about opposition making Hungary part of the war with Russia, it doesn't resonate so as much as he would like to. So we see that this doesn't work always. But again, this is very important because don't forget the famous tweet by Donald Trump from a few months ago, where he said, "He who saves the country does not violate any law." And this is, I think, the essence of it. So if the country is endangered and you convince people that it's in danger, then you are entitled to do a lot of things to save it, to keep it safe, including subversion of democracy.
I think that's very interesting because we often assume that these political entrepreneurs on that side of the political spectrum usually have this innate hatred towards certain groups. What you're saying, I guess, is they might have a latent kind of orientation, but they are very willing to be very constructivist when it comes to building up the threat that works. So basically, they try and error. They try with multiple groups, with multiple angles, and then see what sticks, and then they use that that's very yeah. And I never heard that they actually target those with the focus groups. That's very an interesting approach. And I'll just before we move to the opposition to this, which is also very interesting, you mentioned a concept of motivated reasoning, and I wanted to just expand a little bit on that because Orban, Vučić, with whom we are probably more familiar in this audience compared to other countries and leaders that you covered in your book. In order to believe in this threat, you also have to believe that these politicians are proper defenders of a nation. But many of those have a very problematic CVs on this issue. For instance, in Serbia, Vučić is very often he plays as a father of a nation role, but he is also the one who under who actually Kosovo managed to develop a military. He basically gave up the post office, energy system to Kosovo. For instance, Serbia under Vučić decided to treat IDs from Kosovo as accepted ID on the territory of Serbia, which is effectively recognizing sovereignty of Kosovo. So basically, what we see is he did a lot of things that would discriminate him from position of acting as a defender of a nation. And yet, in order for this to work, many of the people have to discount these informations. They have to completely shut off his actual, very often, decision making, and just believe in this. And especially with Vučić and Orban, since the media has a very important role in this motivated reasoning and basically building this enough threshold for threat for them to jump over. Is that something you explore in the book, or is something for future research?
No, I fully agree with you. I think the media play an important role here because this is why, because you want to control the narrative. So if you want to convince people that the nation is under threat, then you need to control the media, because if you control the media, you control the narrative. So this is why I think the media are one of the first victims of these guys. So because you want to control the narrative, so otherwise people might get information that you don't want them to get. And we see here that in cases where in cases that were more successful in resisting this kind of attacks on democracy were cases where we had independent media, because the opposition had a voice and it could develop counter narratives. So in cases where, and we found this sometimes very, very, very funny. But what he has been doing, this 24/7 presenting himself as the savior of the nation. I don't think that's a coincidence. I think this is a real strategy. Being all the time on the TV, even back basically when people are joking that he's more present on TV than COVID, and always there, always present. I think this is a strategy because you want to convince people that you are doing this, that the nation is threatened, and you are saving the nation. So. But again, for it, you need to control the narrative and you need to control the media. So again, I fully agree with your assessment about how successful he was in defending Kosovo. But again, I'm not sure that his authors are seeing this the way you and I are seeing this, because particularly because of the media, the media capture, and I think this is why this plays a very, very, very important role. We can see now in Hungary that the Hungarian opposition, they managed to push the counter narrative, but thanks to social media, they're much very present on social media. And also this guy Peter Magyar, you can think whatever you like about him, but he visited 4 times every electoral district to talk to the people, because you need to break this cycle somehow. When they have the control of the traditional media, you need to push your message in a different way.
Yeah. And just to go back to I guess to merge two things that you mentioned. One is the civic nationalism, we should go into discussing whether this and in what form this may be a good strategy for resilience to this. But also you mentioned that these authoritarians very often have issues, Fidesz, Orban, and Vučić in Serbia. But what is interesting to me is that basically in both Serbia and in Hungary, they're basically being uh, tested or contested by their own kind. Basically, Magyar was a part of Fidesz regime before. It's very likely that in Serbia, somebody from that ideological flank would be after Vučić. So it seems that a left still didn't learn the name of the game. So basically, the only substitution seems to be a bit, better version of the more liberal version of what we have in power in these countries. It seems to be that the only people who know how to play nationalism is on the right, and seems that the two strategies is either be, extreme nationalist, ethno-nationalist, exclusivist, or you can ignore nationalism at all and just don't play that game at all. That seems to be a losing. For instance, in Serbia, opposition obviously tries to outbid Vučić on those issues. For instance, on Kosovo or some other, we all witnessed the debate about the student movement, about the flags of Russia, of church, no flags of EU, and debate of basically leftists seems to have an issue with finding a way to build a good narrative. So my question would be from this perspective, like, how can nationalism or national narratives, national idea be a good, like a counterattack to this backsliding? How we can use national idea in a good way, basically to defend against this, and what are the cases which this actually happens, and what is the social preconditions for this to actually, be positive or effective?
So, firstly, when I started working on this book, I wanted to explain why people are sacrificing democracy for the nation. And then when I was also presenting some of my earlier versions of the manuscript, then I got, of course, a very, very good advice to include the opposition. So how the opposition reacted to this. So maybe then I would find something. And it was really interesting for me when I started investigating the role of the opposition to this threat-driven narrative about democracy. Our nation is under threat, and we need to save it by subverting democracy. And then I realized that these cases that were successful or partially successful cases like Poland, where into 2023 the trend was reversed, and I also consider Israel a partial success because these attacks on the dependent judiciary were halted. I realized that in these two countries, the opposition acted differently compared to countries where we had a further erosion of democracy, like Serbia, Turkey, and Hungary. And then I started doing interviews with the opposition, and then I realized this hunch was a good one. And then I realized that they've done something differently. What concretely? So if you are faced with an incumbent who is attacking democracy in the name of the nation, so you have three options. So you can ignore the issue of the nation. You can try to outflank the incumbent by being more ethno-nationalist, or you can develop a counter-narrative in which you will integrate this regime versus of the opposition cleavage, meaning that you will integrate also the role of democracy into this narrative. And so by analyzing these five cases, I realized that in Poland and in Israel, they managed to develop a counter-narrative and integrate the regime versus the opposition cleavage. In Turkey, they initially tried to outflank Erdogan, the CHP, by being more ethno-nationalist on the Kurdish issue, or to ignore the issue of nationalism, the nationalist narrative of Erdogan. And then they realized this was a mistake. So now they're trying to develop a counter-narrative. It's not easy, but they told me that they realized this is the only way. In Hungary, they ignored the issue completely. So when I talked to the opposition there, they told me it's not that they were ethno-nationalists like in Turkey, but they thought that they couldn't find a proper narrative to match Orban's narrative until Peter Magyar came. So we can talk also about it. This is, I think, one of the reasons why he's so popular, because he managed to develop this kind of a patriotic narrative. And in Serbia, of course, they either ignored, one part of the opposition ignored this, and one part tried to outflank Vučić from the right. So, and which is also one of the reasons why I think they failed. So then the question is, for me, I think the counter-narratives is the most promising part if you are faced with this kind of an incumbent. Because if you ignore it or try to outflank the incumbent by being more nationalist, I think this is not a good way to go. Then the other question is how to identify a proper narrative that would resonate, how to identify a topic that would serve, that would be a good topic to create this kind of a narrative. I think this is also context dependent. I think this is also there is no general pattern here. So, and I try in my book to offer a few guidances there. So, for example, I think it makes a big difference if the country is marked by so-called formative rift or status problem, meaning that do you have borders that are undisputed, or a national identity is undisputed, or your borders are disputed? Because again, if you see it in the countries where with disputed borders, political entrepreneurs, authoritarian incumbents are always misusing this fact, and they're creating the threat narrative based on this formative rift. So, for example, in Serbia, Vučić, the Kosovo issue, or in Israel, Netanyahu, the Palestinian issue. So, I think if you have this kind of a context, then it's very hard not to address this formative rift. However, you will have some windows of opportunity where you don't need to do this. I think Serbia is this kind of a situation right now because of all these things that you mentioned about Vučić. So I don't think that I think right now they don't need to address Kosovo issue in order to beat him. They can ignore it. They can create their narrative around some other issues because of this contingency factor, meaning that because of the tragedy in Novi Sad, you can develop a narrative. What they've been trying to do, I think, on good governance and on the system, on the rule of law and democracy, basically saying they're taking the flag from him. They're also taking the national anthem for him and other symbols, but they're saying we fight for Serbia that is based on rule of law, good governance, and democracy. I think this can work right now because of this context, because people saw that the corruption kills, but I don't think this is sustainable. So, but maybe this is the window of opportunity that they can use, but I don't think this is sustainable because we see also from the Turkish case, because of the Kurdish issue, the Turkish CHP or the opposition, they didn't know how to be open towards the Kurds, but then still do not alienate ethnic Turkish voters. So then they also, for the local elections, they also had a similar narrative to what Serbian students are having, basically saying we guarantee for good governance, we guarantee for Turkey that is strong, that is performing. It worked at the local level, but it never worked at the national level. So, but again, maybe this is now the time for Serbia where it can work because of the tragedy in Novi Sad, and because I would say this Kosovo conflict is not as relevant as it used to be previously. So again, also the one of the reasons why that I mentioned there that matter, it's also political agency. So when I've done these interviews with political actors, I saw that some of them are more innovative, some of them are more creative, some of them are more courageous to try something new, and some not. So I think it's also we need to also put some of the blame to them, and because they need to also try something new, not only to act in accordance with former so to say rules of the game. But again, to wrap it up, I think it's necessary that you develop a counter narrative. I think it's not good if you try to outflank the incumbent or to ignore it, but to try to create a counter narrative.
Yeah, that's very interesting, especially because Balkans, I think, seems to be in a weird spot in the sense that many societies and this will be my last question before we open floor for others. In terms of you mentioned blaming the West and Western Balkans in many ways have reasons to do that also, but we should also take our own responsibility for certain things. But I don't know, case of Macedonia. Obviously, there have been West made significant mistakes in Macedonia with respect to negotiations with the EU, change of the name. There will be a letdown. In Serbia also, population over 50% will be against West opposition or government. And you mentioned Poland, which was a successful case in your study. But as far as I follow, Polish elections were happened. Opposition basically said, "Okay, we are a Western nation. We're gonna fight for this. We are part of the Europe." So basically, they use this pro-Western narrative to take back the flag into their own hands. In Balkans, we see very often the opposition doesn't think like that. It's at least in Serbia, which is one of your cases, which I keep coming back to that. Is basically if the Western allies would wanna support a position against Vučić, they would just face the fact that opposition probably is less pro-Western than at least most of the opposition, which puts opposition actually at a harm's way because now you don't use this Western leverage in your advantage like in Poland did. So what is like a Western anti-Western narrative importance in this? Since that Vučić is benefiting from it, just as a non-intended consequence.
Mm. Yeah, this is what I meant by saying that there are no general patterns here. So I think if you need to identify the topic that will resonate in this particular context. And it's also very much related to the context, the current context, but also to history. So when you mention Poland, in Poland, they developed a counter narrative around the EU membership. So basically they were saying the PiS with its authoritarianism is going to make the EU kick us out. And we are fighting for democracy in order to remain the member of the EU because this means this is extremely important for our national identity, Poland as a Western country. So and it resonated very well. Again, you have in Serbia a different historical context. So you have these resentments against the West for the war in Yugoslavia and also later because of Kosovo. So and the Vučić and the SNS, they are using it for their own narrative. So and Serbia is not the only case here. So you have something similar in Turkey, also based on historical factors. So basically, they were saying that the West was the one that weakened Turkey 100 years ago, and then the West doesn't want. You have this very similar discourse there how West wants Turkey to be weak and dependent, something similar what Vučić is saying, but again, based on the historical context. So for the opposition, when they're trying to build the winning electoral coalition, they need to also take into account these historical factors and identify an issue that could resonate. But again, you have the West playing different role, but from this historical point of view, I would say.
So in short, opposition should do focus groups too.
Yes, I mean, honestly, I think we can learn a lot from them. So my impression from these interviews was that we can learn a lot from them. And some with what you mentioned is that also the progressives, I would say, are still not getting it, that they need to offer something on this front. The only progressive guy I think who is taking this fight on their turf is Lula in Brazil, because you can see he's always with a flag. He's always saying, by fighting for democracy, we are fighting for Brazil. And you have these cases where this was successful, but somehow we are still missing it.
Yeah, I mean it's not by chance that Orban, Vučić, and I think Israel too, Netanyahu, they had the same
Exactly.
advisor.
Exactly.
Meaning the authoritarian playbook seems to travel, and the
Exactly.
oppositional playbook doesn't seem to diffuse those ideas equally efficiently.
Exactly, because I fully agree, because we still kind of think that we are unique, so my case is unique, but I
Yeah.
don't know. And honestly, I think there is a lot of Western arrogance here, because if JD Vance can say that Orban is a role model, or even Alice Weidel from AfD, but I don't see any Western politician going to Poland to see get some ideas how to fight back.
Okay, thank you very much. Extremely
Mm.
interesting points and topics we covered. But I'm not gonna. I extended overly my position of a interviewer. Sorry. So I will now open floor for the other fellows if there's a questions for Philip on any of these topics or some related. Maybe we didn't get to cover. Awkward silence. First time. I mean, I'm gonna use the René's
Nemanja,
playbook.
hi. I can't raise
Ah,
my hand, but I have a
okay.
question. Is that okay?
Yeah,
I
sure,
don't know
great.
where did the button disappear. Raise hand. Okay, let me
You,
see.
you just speak out. You don't have to raise your hand.
Okay,
Okay.
I'm sorry. Hi, Philip. Hi, everyone. Congratulations on the book.
Thanks. Thanks.
That's really amazing. Yes, so it's a really great topic, and I tried to write down a couple of questions, but obviously, in the interest of time and other folks, I'm sure they also want to talk to you. So I will keep it to two main questions. First is actually about operationalization of some key terms. So, if I understand correctly, the book is called Abandoning Democracy for the Nation. So, in
Yes.
this case, my follow-up question is actually about the definition of democracy. So, how do you define democracy in the book? And more specifically, do you account for political and economic participation, especially in the context and tied to the assumptions made about human nature? So that's my first question. And my second question is about the selection of case studies. Because again, if I understood correctly, these 5 case studies are nations where ethnic nationalism is a dominant narrative. Also, history of disputed borders, foreign invasion, occupation, etc., etc. And I mean, it's really amazing that they're doing like 5 comparative case studies. That's really a big round of applause. But I'm thinking about the US. So democracy is eroding in the United States, and the US is, contrary to these 5 case studies, civic nation. So example of civic nationalism, not ethnic. Also, I'm not sure what other parameters are you looking at, but if you're looking at, I don't know, like economic standing, also some demographic parameters, it's also almost like an outlier to these 5 case studies, but democracy is still eroding, and Trump has really won on this, like America first narrative. So if you can comment on those type of dynamics, I would really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks for these interesting questions, because firstly, I used regarding democracy, I used the definition of Robert Dahl, and the others. So basically, analyzing civil liberties, electoral fairness, and checks and balances. So I have this electoral element of democracy, and also liberal elements of democracy, meaning checks and balances and different civil liberties. And then I show how all these elements were damaged and attacked in the name of the nation. So not always, but I show examples how when they were attacked, the nation was used as a justification. Regarding the case study selection, this is an excellent question, because I also struggle with it. Why? Because these 5 countries are all countries that suffered some more, some less erosion of democracy. And even though they are very different in many ways, so you mentioned some kind of economic development, democratic transitions, also democratic development, some are liberal democracy, some electoral democracy, some are ethnically homogeneous, some are ethnically and religiously heterogeneous, some were suffering economic crisis. In some countries, economy was booming. So there are all these factors that can influence democratic backsliding and resilience. So, but they all have one common thing, is that you had these attacks on democracy that were justified with the nation-related argument, and it worked. And it worked. Why? Because I think it's because of their historical background of this similarity, meaning that ethnic nationalism was dominant one when these nations were formed, and this kind of a narrative resonated there. But again, I argue that against path dependency, because firstly, we see that in 2 countries, in spite of this kind of historical background, the opposition managed to fight back successfully. So meaning that it's not only about history and not only about structural factors, but it's also about political agencies. So what political actors are doing or not doing, it does matter. And again, I'm also focused on this kind of a discursive fight for democracy, because again, we have a lot of factors there that do matter in this fight, but I'm only focused on this discursive fight because of this threat narrative and the justification of attacks in the name of the nation, and how the opposition reacted. Again, then, when I started doing this book, I was, for example, when I presented it it was initially a paper, and I presented it at APSA in 2023. So my discussant, Michael Kopech, told me you should include the US as the case. But I was honestly afraid. So to be very, very honest, I was afraid to include the US as a case, because US is an important big case. But then now, from this point of view, I can tell you I was wrong, because US case is exactly strengthens my argument, because the US is very different case from these cases. So like what you said, it has a tradition of the civic nationalism. It was never occupied, never lost a territory. There is no victimization narrative based on history, but nevertheless, Trump used very similar approach to attack democracy, and it worked. So then it kind of strengthens my point that political agency matters a lot. And the current also, there is no path dependency, because current factors, current processes, and structural factors also matter a lot. So if I ever want to continue my research, I will definitely include US, but not only US, also India, because India also has a tradition of civic nationalism that Modi completely changed, and also I will use the Brazilian case as well.
I think we have what I see two more hands up. One is Rene, and the other Anastas sent a message that I don't think he's able to speak. If that's the case, I will after Rene asks his question, I will read Anastas' question later on.
Okay. Hi, Philip. First of all, thank you very much for your talk. This is definitely a good pitch, and I'm looking forward to reading your book. Now, I'm making a couple of assumptions about the nature of your data just based on all the cases you have. So I assume it's mainly quantitative with some interviews for clarification of
Yes.
the processes. And so I have a lot of questions because, ahead of reading the book. But one was I'm really fascinated by the nuance that you incorporate in your talk about how these threat narratives have a component of stretching, of elasticity within them, and they can adapt themselves to changing contexts. And I was wondering if in your data you saw any particular turning points that emerged, and I was just thinking about in terms of inclusions of the other in the group of the nation, like for example, Poland, are the Ukrainians part of this white nation? Are they outsiders in Turkey? When do Kurds become part of the national projects? When they're not, And then another thing which is unrelated but possibly also connected to the data is, did you account for political participation rates across different segments of the electoral body? And did that have any influence? Please don't feel compelled to answer these very large questions. Maybe I'll have them once I read the book. But anyways, thank you again.
Thanks, Rene. Can you maybe repeat the second question? Because I'm not sure I understood it. So what do you mean by the participation?
I'm just thinking of the countries where I spent most of my adulthood, and sometimes the narratives, the threat narratives, the group narratives are also geared to who tends to vote, what segments, what strata of the of the electoral body tends to vote. And I guess that is also inflected by the kind of representational system that you have in whatever country you. Does it make sense?
Yeah. No, thanks. So regarding the first question, so I mean, I think, like, again, I was very surprised that when I heard from that they are very meticulous about it. So I think when they were developing these narratives, so that they are firstly testing many subjects, many objects, and then I think it's also, you cannot exclude also some external factors. For example, in Poland, you had 2015 the immigration crisis. That, I mean, immigration was a non-relevant issue for peace just a few months ago, and then they seized the opportunity. So they are very pragmatic there. Also, Turkey, Erdogan, firstly, he had a very inclusive approach toward Kurds, and a lot of Kurds voted for him. But then I talked to people from this Kurdish Dem party. They basically told me they were one step before signing the treaty, and suddenly Erdogan abandoned everything and initiated the war for internal political reasons, because this is why they are called entrepreneurs, because they are basically doing these things, trying to they're very pragmatic, very elastic, and then they look what works, what doesn't work, even though this is also not very easy for them. So it's not easy to always identify one topic that will resonate. So, like in Poland in 2023, this anti-German sentiment and German narrative didn't resonate as much as immigration, and also 2019 anti-LGBTQ narrative. So this makes it much harder for them, but in a way it helps pro-democratic forces. So why does it resonate? So honestly, I think this is a key question. So what you ask, because we have this, it resonates within some parts of the population, but not with others. So even though there are these historical factors that are applicable to the whole country, some segments of the society do not buy this narrative, some do. So why is it the case? I don't know. I mean, there is some theory out there saying that this pre-existing ethnic sentiment in education also that plays a role. Maybe also partisanship, these cues from party leaders. So I think they definitely play a role. But I hope that there will be some future research that will tell us how can we immune ourselves and parts of the society from this kind of a threat narrative, because this would also help us make societies more resilient.
Okay, so I guess if there is nobody else, I will just now read Anastas' question. So Anastas is unable to join us with camera. So he first wanted you to say congrats on the book and the in-depth research.
Thanks.
And his question is basically, to what extent is the liberal democracy model itself stimulating nationalist populist political agendas? After all, it is an easy way to mobilize votes. And also, you don't have to win all the votes, you just need to win share large enough. Also, is there at this point any liberal democracy, liberal democratic polity anywhere in the world that has not been taken over by or significantly threatened by bad guys?
Well, I must say that, like, maybe not very popular, but I think that you had these intellectuals like Denan and from Notre Dame and some others who are criticizing liberalism for individualism. And I think there is something there, and I must say they are very much right that liberalism focused too much on individualism and neglected the fact that the human beings have a fundamental need for group belonging. So, and we left this space open. So, like I said, as liberals, and this is why the others, the far right, particularly, is very successful when they are developing this nation-related narrative about the endangered identity, sovereignty, because we don't offer anything else. By we, I mean the progressives and the liberals. So I think this is one. This is, if you ask me, is the liberal democracy kind of a supporting this kind of a reaction. So I would say in this way, by focusing too much on individualism, by treating people as purely individuals and not as group members, I think that we are the liberal democracy is making, or the liberals are making this mistake. And I think that what we discussed about this authoritarian playbook, I think it travels very well, because you can see this kind of a threat narrative in many countries. So what I also learned from these interviews is that there is an exchange between these guys. We know something, what Nemanja mentioned, something is also public about Orban, Vučić, and Netanyahu having the same advisor. But I also heard that they are meeting, of course, behind the scene and exchanging knowledge and experiences. Because again, we see that this kind of a threat narrative flies in many cases, in many countries, in different contexts. Because again, I come back to the human nature. So and this is why we need to treat this issue, not ignore it. So something that I push for in my book, and develop a counter narrative. This is definitely not the sole thing that will help us, but I think it's one of the ways how to defeat the illiberals or authoritarian minded leaders.
Thank you, Filip. We have another question from Borjan.
Thank you, Filip and Nemanja, for hosting this discussion. My question for Filip is, what's your take on social determinants of populism? And do you buy the left behind argument that, people who lost their well-being or seek for some greater purpose while having empty stomachs, how does that explain populism or tendency towards populism?
Mm. I mean, I haven't investigated myself so much the terms for populism, but what I know from other research and is that of course these economic factors, they do play a role, they do play a very important role, but it's not only about them. And what I found very interesting, it's a lot about perception. So it's about perception of economic inequalities, not only about the real economic inequalities, so to say. So, and I think that in order to fight it, we need also to fight this kind of a perception, because sometimes I think that we miss this fact that for example, in Poland in 2015, you had Polish economy was booming even during the economic crisis, the financial crisis. I think the only country in Europe, at least in the EU, where GDP grew. And you had a party PiS in 2015. You know what was their campaign slogan? Poland in ruins, and it worked. And it worked because I think because it was based mainly on the perception that okay, we are progressing, but you know, I didn't get my fair share of the pie. So I think this also play a role, including also, and I wouldn't forget these nation related issues, because we also have this identity argument that also play an important role. But again, sometimes also based on perception, because again we can see that in many countries you have the number of asylum seekers has been much lower every year. Nevertheless, the far right is increasing its share of votes, because we see that it's not about structural factors, but it's a lot about the perception and how to change this perception. I think you can change the perception only with narratives.
Thank you, Philip. Is there any other question? I don't see any more raised hands, but I guess that means that it's about time to wrap it up. So again, I would like to thank Philip for taking his time and for sharing his findings and his research. We got a exclusive. This is first discussion of his book in public. So hopefully all others go as good as well as this one did. We're looking forward to reading the book, of course. I'd like also to thank all the fellows who were been here and who asked the questions, and I hope we didn't keep you too long from your lunch.
Well, thank you, Nemanja, first of all, again for invitation, and thank you guys for great questions. If there is anything, please anything else, please write me. I'm very happy to share the book, and I think we honored our promise to Rene that he can go eat on time, right?
Yeah.
So I love that this is recorded. Thanks, Rene. Thanks, Philip, very much, and thank you, Nemanja. So next week we have a little break as we are all in CES. I hope that you're looking forward to it, because I do. Yeah, that's it. Thank you very much, and see you next week in person. Bye-bye.
All right.